My name is Larry Rafel. I have the great honor of serving as the fourth dean at the Touro College Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center. I present this program today in honor of my beloved mother, who's 85 today and was a Hungarian Jewish girl from Budapest who was sent to the camps, not on the train, but many others were sent on the train. It's now my great honor and my great privilege to present to you one of the greatest Jews of today, the man who prosecuted Eichmann, a member of the Israeli Supreme Court, the Honorable Gabriel Bach.
Good evening to you all. Shalom to you all. This was a very moving film. I've actually never seen this film so far. What I have certain doubts is whether someone who's not been part of the proceedings then, whether the whole picture is clear of what really happened there, what was decided, and in both instances. So I'll just shortly try to summarize the picture as I saw it then. At that time, I was the Deputy State Attorney of Israel. I did not take part in the first proceedings before the Jerusalem District Court, where Judge Halevi actually held against Kasztner the maximum of points. But then, when the Attorney General Chaim Cohen decided to appeal to the Supreme Court, he asked me to prepare the whole of the appeal. So I prepared the request of appeal, the appeal itself, the notice of the appeal, the contents, and also the arguments that were used before the Court of Appeal. Just a few words of sort of the things that perhaps essentially one has to know. You know, Kasztner was born in Transylvania, but this afterwards became part of Russia, part of Hungary, and he then later in Hungary became one of the Zionist leaders, first of all, an organization to help survivors and refugees. And these people, they try to warn many of the Jews in Hungary of the what was awaiting them from the point of view of the danger and the danger for their lives. Many of them did not did not want to believe that. They repudiated that, and they thought that this was very much exaggerated. And then later, I mean, he remained in Hungary. Then, as you know, Eichmann personally came to Hungary. Usually Eichmann sat in Berlin and pulled the strings, and his assistants were doing the work in the various countries. But when the German army entered Hungary, I don't know if you remember why. I mean, Hungary was on the side of the Germans and the Italians, but the Hungarian leader wanted to make a separate peace at the time. He didn't want to cooperate at first with the deportation of the 500,000 Jews from Hungary. So the Germans decided to enter Hungary and to force him to cooperate. And Himmler said the master himself, Eichmann, has to go to Hungary to see to it that there's no mass escape and no mass uprising. So Eichmann was there in person. And then when the deportation of the Jews started, Kasztner, as head of the of important help organizations, Help for Survivors and Zionism, he conducted negotiations with him and with this other man, Kurt Becher. I'll refer to that a bit later. And he managed at a certain stage to get the permission that about 1,684 people Jews were permitted to go to a neutral country. At first they said to Switzerland, but later they were taken to Bergen-Belsen, but from there most of practically all of them arrived in Switzerland. Now, some people say as if that was the only thing that Kasztner was interested in. That's not really so. he thought that this was the beginning. He thought that that in addition to that one, there could be an additional number of Jews who could be saved. Not only that, but one has to remember, war was closing, was progressing. This was at the final stages, and the Russians were progressing. So they thought, he and some other of the Jews thought, that if they continue negotiations, that might help them to save time and to bring to the close of the war, and that might save additional Jews. While if they discontinue negotiations, or they do something which makes it impossible for the Germans to continue negotiations with them, that might not only cause their own death, but also a death of many other people, and prevent a final saving. You know, as the judges of the Supreme Court said, it's very easy to be very clever after the war. You know, when all the things have passed, then to know you should have done this, you should have done that. But if you see there the situation, and this is what we felt there at the time, that this man, Kasztner, he was there, he saw there was some chance of carrying on negotiations. He managed to say, there were many important rabbis, many of the leaders of the Jewish community. All right, so he also put in his own family. I mean, who wouldn't have done that? Under those circumstances, he would just force his family alone. So some members were there also. Some people might say you should have disregarded your family. I don't know whether most of us would have acted that way under those circumstances. But then what was not quite clear from the film, I know he came in 1947, he came to Israel. And there, the Minister of Finance and other financial corporations, he appointed Kasztner as a spokesman for this ministry. And then this man, this journalist, Malkiel Greenwald, he wrote an article which was widely published all over Israel. And there he accused Kasztner of, first of all, he said Kasztner should be eliminated. And then he accused him of 4 things: conspiring with the Nazis in order to help them, a conspirator in the murder of 500,000 Jews from Hungary, taking part in the robbery of the property of the Jews together with the Germans, and 4th, a point of accusation, that he gave testimony in Nuremberg for some of the Nazis, Kurt Becher, Krumai, Wisliceni, and others, and another one, during the Nazification trials in Nuremberg. Now, many people have said, why did the Attorney General file an act of libel? That also, just imagine, here is a high official in the Israel government, a spokesman for a ministry, and someone writes about him things like that. Now, either the man must leave his position, but if he wants to continue in the government, this man who says that has to be charged with libel. I mean, you have to find out what happened there. And therefore, the fact that this case was brought, I think, was absolutely justified. So Kasztner brought a civil case, and we, the prosecution, the state attorney's office, we brought an action of libel against that man, Malkiel Greenwald. Now, what Benjamin Halevi, I mean, when I looked at this judgment, the first few hundred, he wrote hundreds of pages. The first things were very objective, but then I somehow felt that the whole tragedy of the frightening tragedy of what happened somehow went the better of him, and that he lost somehow his sense of proportion. What I want to add is it started as the libel case against Malkiel Greenwald, but then it became the case of Kasztner. Kasztner was regarded as the person accused, and he was the one, his guilt or his innocence was the one which had to be decided. Now, what Benjamin Halevi decided was that Malkiel Grünwald should be acquitted of 3 of the 4 points. The one that conspiring with cooperating with the Nazis, being an associate in the murder of 500,000 Jews, and the testimony in favor of the Nazis. What Benjamin Halevi did not find guilty of, but found Malkiel Grünwald guilty of libel, was this question of taking part in the robbery of Jews in Hungary. That he found really was not justified, but therefore he found Malkiel Grünwald guilty of that, but because of all the other facts, he gave him 1 shekel, 1 pound punishment. That was all that Malkiel Grünwald got. So then, again, the question arose, what was the Attorney General right in appealing? Well, I think there was no choice. First of all, when we looked at the whole of the evidence, we thought that here really the judge had somehow lost his sense of proportion. There's only one thing that I wanted to point out, with most people, even in the books, they don't realize. When it says that Benjamin Halevi wrote, Kasztner sold his soul to the devil. This was also quoted in the film here, and it's always mentioned. Here, I think injustice is done also to the judge. It's not just that he said he sold his soul to the devil. That was, you have to take it in its contents. He quoted a letter written by a rabbi from Slovakia called Rabbi Weissmandl. That rabbi wrote to all the Jewish leaders in the various European countries in the neighborhood, and he described what was happening, and that there was a danger for the lives of all Jews. And he says, in order to help as many Jews as possible, we have to conduct negotiations, even with the Nazis, and even with the local militia, and also with people of the local representatives and the police in our various countries. And he added, even if by doing so we run the danger of selling our soul to the devil. And the judge said, and this is what happened to Kasztner. Actually, in the whole of this, as far as Kasztner is concerned, that is the one point where I found some sympathy with Kasztner. You know, when he said that. Of course, there is a criticism there as well. But in fact, that he said, that Weissmandl said, we have to do these terrible things, even if there is a danger that by doing so we sell our souls to the devil. He said, that is what happened to him. That is not... doesn't look as negative as it is sometimes quoted when just the sentence as such is quoted. In any case, we appealed. I prepared that appeal, and there by a majority, there were 5 judges, and by practically on all points, some points there was less, but there was always a majority. A majority of the judges held that under those circumstances it was impossible to find Kasztner guilty, let's say, of all these things. That under those circumstances, when the war was perhaps approaching what he thought might approach its end, and there were these negotiations. By the way, sometimes I'm asked, why did Eichmann agree to that? First of all, he had instructions from above, because usually he rejected any attempt to save even one single Jew, which I did show in the Eichmann trial, and we can discuss it some other time. But here he apparently agreed. Perhaps he thought that if he has these negotiations about 1,000 or 1,600 people, that might help to prevent the Jews from taking active parts in organizing resistance or in organizing mass escape. Perhaps, I don't know. I think that that is quite possible that Eichmann had such thoughts like that. But that doesn't mean that that was the intention of Kasztner. And on the contrary, Kasztner hoped that there would be additional number of people. So, in any case, the court on the appeal, they held that here grave injustice had been done to Kasztner, that his intention was to save a maximum of Jews, and he thought this was the best way. Then they said, why didn't he interfere actively when Hannah Senish, this parachutist, when she was brought there? Hannah Senish they found some British papers on them, and she was charged with espionage. Now, it was quite clear that if Kasztner would have, first of all, he didn't think that he could do anything about it. Secondly, if he had done that, he would have been regarded as a British spy. That would have discontinued any possibility to continue negotiations with the Nazis. So again, all sorts of decisions could be taken. But here, not to endanger the possibility to save thousands of Jews, just to interfere in something where it was very doubtful that anyone would have listened to him at all, and they would only arrested him as well, that is something which I also didn't think it was justified to criticize a person for that. And therefore, actually, you can say that apart from here, I must also tell you, there was one point where I personally suggested not to appeal. That was the evidence given by Kasztner in favor of the Nazi Kurt Becher and others. I knew Kasztner, I talked to him. I'm very often asked, what was your impression? Why did he do that? I don't know, there are lots of possible answers. My personal feeling was, here he had that connection with Eichmann. He saw that fanatical person completely identified with the Holocaust and everything connected. There was this man, Kurt Becher. He dealt with Jewish property. He apparently spoke to Eichmann in a more reasonable and more polite and ordinary manner. And he went with Kasztner at the end of the war, 44 and beginning of 45, to Switzerland. He went with him to Mauthausen, Bergen-Belsen, and other places, and apparently helped. He, together with Kasztner, managed to save thousands of Jews at these final stages of the war. But in addition, there's more to this, and part of it, I must say it as criticism against Kasztner. I had a sort of feeling that a man who suffered such a lot there, who was confronted by this man, Eichmann, who saw these people who treated him more or less on an equal basis. The fact that now, at the end, he could be instrumental in saving some of these Germans from part of the punishment, that gave him some kind of, for his ego, some kind of satisfaction. That, I can't prove that, but that was my personal feeling. But I say this as part of criticism. I mean, I can understand maybe that influenced him, but I did not want to introduce that into the appeal. I wanted that point to be left open. But the Attorney General told me that Eichmann was promised, that Kasztner had been promised that the whole of the judgment would be part of the appeal, and that therefore also that part should be put in. Now, that part, the prosecution, the state attorney's office did not succeed. The judges did criticize Kasztner on this act, that he gave evidence in the Nuremberg trials for this. But still, this is they didn't attach any very extreme negative motivations for this. But they found that he should not have done. But apart from that, of all the 95 or 98% of the case, Kasztner was cleared. But as you know, he was murdered a few months before that. And therefore, he did not know of this final result where his name was cleared. And you can imagine, for all of us who took part in these proceedings, that, I mean, there were lots of tragic moments. Looking at the first judgment, and then during the appeal, and all the argument and all the difficulties. But this, as far I can only testify from my feeling, the most terrible thing was that we had this feeling that here justice was done finally, that the judgment was given to clear Kasztner of these serious, terrible offenses of cooperating with the Nazis in the murder of Jews, but that all that didn't help to save to save his name in his own mind and to his own satisfaction, because he was murdered a few months before. Thank you very much.
I'm just thrilled to be able to introduce to you Joseph Berger, who I have never met before, but he is a New York City physician, originally from Hungary. His father was a physician, and he and his father and his mother and his sister were on the train, Kasztner's train. It's certainly a great pleasure and a great honor to welcome Dr. Joseph Berger.
Thank you. I just want to say few things. I was 7 years old in Bergen-Belsen on my birthday in a concentration camp. I lived basically like any normal kid until the early spring of 1944. We had 1 million Hungarian-speaking Jews walking around when 5 million had already been destroyed, walking around like nothing was going on. And anything to say that Kasztner should have warned everybody to run out and pick up arms. You cannot fight with slingshots. The same way that the Israeli government sent a few parachuters against 10,000 well-armed German troops that expected them to do something. There were 4 that came to Budapest that they were captured, and as the judge said, 1 had British papers. Also, Kasztner was not the picked choice. Kasztner was the man who was the assistant. Joel Brandt was the man who started to negotiate, and Eichmann sent him to a neutral country, to Istanbul, where the Jewish agency, through, as you saw in the film, got rid of him, and by default, Kasztner became what he became. You had to be a strong, arrogant person to negotiate with a man like Eichmann, who was smoking cigarettes, blowing smoke in your face, and any minute pick up the gun and shoot it. I also have to tell you that the way he was working with the Nazis helped save Jews that were not deported and that were not sent to Bergen-Belsen. Because when Horthy was deposed, the fascist Hungarians came and they would line 6 Jews up at a time by the Danube, pull a gun to save bullets and shoot 6 people and throw them. If anybody goes to Budapest, you see shoes along the Danube where the Hungarians were killing. So the Hungarian fascists were worse, and a lot of times the SS had to protect us. We went on a train. I'll tell you a little quick story. I happened to be a gynecologist. My dad was a pediatrician, and we were riding in a cattle car, and a lady sitting next to my dad went into labor. He delivered the baby. Even though he was a pediatrician, he used my shoelaces to tie the umbilical cord. This is not the reason I became a gynecologist. And to tell you how crazy the Germans were, I traced down the young lady that my father delivered. She's a professor of cardiology at the University of New South Wales in Australia. I had the honor to come visit us last year, and she brought me the birth certificates. The Nazis made out of birth certificates, somebody born on a train. I thank you very much.
So I want to close this proceeding with a quote. It's a quote that I heard the other day from Justice Bach, and it's so powerful, if I can get through it in one piece. It's so powerful that I want to share it with all of you as my present to you. This is what Justice Bach said last Thursday in this room. The moment that the 3 judges walked in on the first day of the Eichmann trial, with the symbol of the State of Israel behind them, with the flag of the State of Israel next to them, and then when Eichmann, ever the formal Nazi, snapped to attention to salute, only then, more than any other time in my life, any speech, any symbol, any monument, only then did I understand the reason for the existence of the State of Israel. Thank you very much for coming. Good night.